Good morning. This is with my good friend Brad Flower. Internet connection.
Brad Flower
and Mark Henderson Leary. How are you, sir?
Delightful. Like a daisy.
Yeah, I'm trying to get going. You saw me there. I got the jumping going, and then
then shit just started falling apart. The next thing you know, you got earplugs hanging out and microphone bouncing off the ground.
Yeah. So speaking of self-efficacy,
smoothest transition ever.
I'm a pro.
Yeah. When I jump, I expect to achieve. Yeah.
So you wanted to talk about self-efficacy. Say something profound now.
Oh man, on the spot. When you set out to do something, do you believe that you're going to achieve, or do you set out to do things and have lingering doubt as you're attempting?
It's a great. I like kind of be caught off guard. You mentioned the concept, and then you hit me with that question, and I'm going to kind of go into. It's an interesting to know. Because the difference between self-efficacy and self-confidence, right? It's the state of sort of belief, your emotional status. I'm self-confident. Self-efficacy is a little more thoughtful, right? It's that this will be success. I think that I can get the stated outcome, the belief that you are built and capable, right? Is that kind of the essence of that?
Yeah. But self-efficacy is that whatever you set out to do, you believe you're going to attain the outcome desired.
So I don't know. Sometimes the state of confidence is, I don't know what's about to happen, but I think it's going to be worth it, and I think I'm gonna maybe have to retry. Maybe the path won't be as short as I would hope, because I've certainly been very humbled in life by tackling things that did not go great the first run. Or the first 3 attempts, or things just taking way longer than I thought they were supposed to take. That's probably the biggest thing. I think I learned about work ethic in my 50s, which of course I'm not quite 50 yet. So I think I will have learned about work ethic by the time I am in my 50s. And what I mean is, I did not understand how long things take. When I was hearing stories of people being successful and things, ultimately, it was so hard, so long. It took many tries. I had to do this, I had to do that. I didn't realize how long was. When somebody says, I went to this school, I wanted to switch schools, I had to sit out a year. It takes 11 milliseconds to say set out a year. It takes a year to sit out a year. That's a long time.
And there's a lot of 23-year overnight successes, right?
Yeah.
Because we only hear about the finish line. We never hear about everything that led up to it. But self-efficacy is one of those things that when you talk to people who are performers, when you talk to producers, when you talk to professionals, the question of behavioral change, the question of growth, of expansion, whether it's personal or professional, and asking people, hey, if you do this, how do you think it's going to work out? Anything other than an answer of positive affirmation, begins to allow doubt to creep in. And when doubt creeps in, we tend to, physically manifest our beliefs, right? And so if we don't believe something is going to work out, we tend to behave accordingly. A simple example, I heard an interview with Shaun White, the
snowboarder,
right? Yeah. Skateboarder, snowboarder, best of all time kind of guy.
Yeah.
And they were asking him about trying new tricks. And he said, well, look, first and foremost, I never attempt a new trick unless I 100% believe that I can pull it off. He goes, if there's the slightest doubt in my head, I'm not even going to try. Because I only try once I believe 100% that it's going to be pulled off. Because you get upside down, 30 feet in the air, and all of a sudden your brain starts going, oh shit, you're physically going to react.
Yeah.
Right? It's like if you've seen kids, they're standing on the edge of the diving board, and they want to do a backflip, right? And they're telling them, I'm going to do a backflip. I'm going to do a backflip. And then they jump and they go, what am I doing? And they freeze up and they just go smack on the back, right? Yeah. That's the brain interfering with performance. And so, we do that professionally. What do we tell ourselves that interferes, right?
Well, so there are two types of things to think about here, because not every interaction is, I can't. I was going to try to throw out a Shaun White move. I can't think of any of the moves. Like a really dangerous spinning move in the air over really hard ice at a really high velocity.
You could have made up a name and we'd have believed it, like a Daffy McDuck. Oh yeah, those are awesome.
Yeah, the McTwist. You did it. Yeah, absolutely, the McTwist. So I was trying to get to. So those are real instinctive things. That's when you have to be trained and on autopilot. Everything has to be automatic. You have to be in a flow state. There's no time for thinking and cognition in that sense. It has to be well beyond into automatic. But there are many things in life that happen in slower motion. And oftentimes they work against us. Like I think the golf game is the classic thing. Everything is so slow in golf. Your mind can absolutely do 100 things to sabotage you and set you up for success before you actually putt the ball and something happens.
Yeah.
So not everything requires exactly that perfect confidence. You don't have to be on the golf course. Like if I wouldn't even attempt this putt if I didn't think it was possible. It's like, just wait a sec. Okay. And take a breath. Okay. There we go. Yeah. So the point of saying that is I do think humility, when I think my self-efficacy is very high right now because I think I have so many experiences to say that, yeah, it was totally broken before. I tried it, didn't work. And then what I did is I learned something new and I iterated and I stuck with it. And so when I think I'm going to tackle something, I have sort of a calmness that I believe this will turn out great. Even if the first attempt doesn't turn out great, I know what happens based on experience. I try and I go learn and I go ask and I try something else and I do some research. And history says that I can get this type of thing done because I got a lot of resources, even if things don't go great, to get it on track eventually.
Well, it's interesting because I think you brought in a good analogy that a lot of people, even if you don't play golf, you probably would resonate with because it makes sense. But, you mentioned standing over a putt. And although, let's say it's a 25-foot putt for non-golfers, that's a lengthy putt. When you're standing over that putt, what are you telling yourself, right? Are you telling yourself, okay, God, don't hit it too hard because if I hit it too hard, then I'm going to have another 20-foot putt coming back. Or don't hit it too soft because if I hit it too soft, then I'm going to have a 8-footer for par, or don't push it, don't pull it. Or are you just telling yourself, I always make these putts, right? Because if you're talking, if you have negative self-talk, right, or self-doubt, there's a good chance your body is going to respond accordingly, right? And how does that manifest? Well, it manifests as a twitch, right? So right as you make contact, you kind of tense up because you're like, oh crap, I don't know what's going to happen. And you pull it or you push it or you knock it 25 feet past the hole versus, if you have that positive self-talk, that positive belief that I always make these putts, you have a smooth rhythm because obviously you've put in the effort, or assuming you've put in the effort and practice. You don't just walk out and become good at anything, but that free mind allows you to swing freely. And so in business, I think it's very similar. I was training last week and teaching some concepts, and people would say things like, yeah, I love this. This is great, but I'd really like to see it in practice first. So what are they processing whenever they see a technique? They go, that's great. I love it. I think that would work. But then they say to themselves, I need to see it in practice first, right? What that's telling them is I couldn't do that. I can't go practice that. I can't go rehearse that. I can't deliver that because I don't have quite the belief that it's going to work out.
Well, if I said that, you say that, I don't know if you're trying to tell me I'm stupid. But I would be saying I would be saying that because I get the theory and it's not quite real for me. And if I can hear some context, I can hear what the actual words are, because I know for me, a couple of words are the difference between theory and real, or just not totally different scenarios. And so when I know from history that I've learned something in theory, I go into real practice, go, oh, well, it didn't come at me at that speed at all. I needed to hear it at a different speed, a different context. And I thought they were going to say this, and they said this other thing. And so I was totally caught off guard. And so I want to get the reps and practice in the real life situation so I can hear kind of where that would come from, eager to get that practical reality. Yeah. And so you're right. I mean, I would be saying, yeah, I'm not self-effective yet, or I don't have that self-efficacy yet. Yeah. And I need some specific information in life to get me there.
Well, and so I think you bring up that one of the important connectors, right? One of the important connectors is preparation, or practice, right. Whether it's golf or whether it's role-playing sales calls or role-playing a critical conversation with an employee or role-playing a presentation that you're giving to a board or to a key prospect or client. Preparation is critical. I mean, you and I were talking about young kids before the call, our young kids specifically. But one of the things I've always taught my daughters is look, nerves often are a byproduct of lack of preparation, right? And, granted, butterflies are natural for everybody. If you're standing in the wings about to walk on stage for a performance, you're going to have butterflies, but the best way to minimize butterflies is preparation.
Right? That's a good point. And I do think there are two versions of that. Every time I go out on stage in any form, whether it's back in the old days when I was playing music or if I'm doing a large talk, as soon, walking up, getting ready, I'm nervous. And then when the show starts going, I'm into the flow and it's just on. And I remember to, especially, it's less now because it's my profession to be in front of the audience. But when it was more fun in the music world, I'd be getting ready to go out on stage. I'd be unbelievably nervous, unbelievably nervous, and walking out to the microphone and almost like can't even keep myself standing up. My knees are wobbly. Sure. And then bam. And I would just think in retrospect, as soon as I started singing and playing, poof, all gone. But
it's interesting. I mean, because my wife and girls love American Idol, and they actually talked about that last week before. I think they were coaching one of the performers, and the first time they ran through it, the kids sounded very shaky.
Yeah. And
you sound nervous. I am nervous. You said, okay, so you're going to be nervous when you walk on stage. So practice those three notes, those first three notes over and over and over and over again, so that when you walk on stage, you'll at least hit those first three notes. And then the rest it'll just trigger, right? It'll come into play. And so I think that's, kind of like you're talking, right? Once the show hits, once it's go live, you've got enough time and preparation to fall into the groove, but it doesn't take away the initial nerves. But, regardless of what we're doing, are we putting in the time to plan and prepare? Because I do think a big piece of self-efficacy is having invested the time. Right?
Well, so to that point, I think there's two versions of nervousness. One is the eagerness and the uncertainty.
That's excitement, right?
Yeah, that's excitement. Yeah. But like when I was in music school, I really understood the binary of that, because I would show up occasionally to a music class where there was a test of some kind, either something I had to perform or it could be a literal test. And a large portion of the time I would show up a little unprepared, and maybe a lot unprepared. And
come on, Mark.
And so the nervousness that came with that was horrible. The uncertainty and just maybe it was more likely a great deal of certainty that this was not going to go great. And then there would be times where I would show up and I had done the work, and it was very noticeable to me how much less nervous I was, even though I wasn't sure how I would do. I had this feeling of like, look, maybe I'm going to fail this music theory test. But I care a lot less about that outcome because I feel like I did my part at this point.
Yeah.
At least I don't have to carry the guilt of lack of preparation, which
Right.
maybe that's I haven't unpacked that, but maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was other things that put pressure on me. The pressure was so much less when I had done the work, even when I wasn't sure it was going to go great. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, certainly a big piece of self-efficacy in believing in your ability to perform is knowing what performers do in preparation, right? You know, you think of some of the best artists, some of the best performers, and you think it just comes now. Oh, they have a gift. You know, they just, regardless of how you feel about Kanye West, you know, there's a biopic on HBO, I think, or Netflix, but I watched it recently. You know, and when he was coming up, his goal was to create 5 beats a day, right? Right, 5 beats a day, that every day. And so, you know, and you can think, you know, he's well known for a handful of just really amazing beats and songs. But think about how many he created to have found those, right? And so, you know, artists, painters, you know, how many thousands of canvases have they painted before they, found lightning in a bottle and created their masterpieces? You know, in the professional setting, we often don't think about practice or preparation, but in so many other professions, that's all they do, right? And part of believing that you're going to succeed, and part of believing that you're going to come out on top is what's put into it. It's not just.
I love this concept, and I think some real power in it, because every time I hear a sports or artist analogy to business, one of the things that kind of, well, everybody loves to make them, right? But there's a difference in the field. We love to sort of bring the idea of the spirit of competitive spirit and aggressive winning into business, but it doesn't really pass a sanity check, right? Most people don't show up at their 8 a.m. sales meeting on Monday like, let's do this, we got to win this. It's just like, how's the weekend, and that's normal. So what's the difference? Part of the issue, I think, is that there's no real consistency of process that has a proven formula for us to get obsessive about and then go compete with somebody else who's taking it as seriously or more seriously. It's kind of chaos out there. It's kind of low standard of excellence because everybody's doing it a different way, and we make it too complicated, and it's too much to keep track of. And so if you want to bring that preparation where you've got the reps, one thing has to be true. You got to have something to repeat. That a rep is short for repetition. And so you have to have something that you believe in. And that's a simplification. And my whole point is to bring this down. Like, if you want to be able to bring that efficacy and you want to have consistent expectations for result, you got to have something to repeat that gives you that information, gives you that track record to say, yeah, I'm so good at this, I don't have to think about it. And the results are there not every time, but most of the time. And if I don't get the results this one time, I'm not going to sweat it, because I know I'm going to get lots of results because I got the history, because there's something to repeat.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of, what that would be, specifically in the business world.
I got it for you, man. So like meetings. Do you make up your meeting pulse? Do you make your meeting structure? Do you have meetings when you think you need them? Do you have a meeting for everything with no particular agenda? That's a great one, right? Like, are there objectives, or are you just talking about shit? Let's actually figure out how to make meeting time efficient. How are we going to judge our folks? Do we have a scorecard? Do we have things that say like this is how we judge the offense, this is how we judge the defense? Or are you just kind of judgmentally figuring it out, like, I like the guy, I like the girl, and so that's the thing. If there's no consistency of process and structure, you're going to be chasing every little thing, and you're going to listen to everybody's opinion about what's good and bad, and everybody's playing a different game, and so everybody's got a different way of measuring, and so it's all just mess.
Well, and even to break it down into a more daily process or procedures is practicing communication. Right.
Right.
I had a great friend who owns a company, and he was walking. He was expecting a difficult conversation with one of his key employees, and so he hey, I need to talk to you about this. Can we practice? Here's what I think he's going to be saying. Here's what I think he's going to be asking me. Here's what I think he's going to be pushing for. How would you respond? And we went back and forth. We practiced, we banter, and we fine-tuned what his response could be. But it was principle based, not just delivery based. It was, well, hey, part of it is we don't want to give what they're saying any fuel to make the fire burn hotter and brighter. So how do you take the wind out? How do you take the air out? And then but practicing concepts in communication, right? Learning how to respond and not react as a leader, right? And what's the difference between responding and reacting? Well, reacting is, allowing your emotions to trigger and, doing a spontaneous yin and yang, right? Or a tit for tat. They come off heated, you respond and you react in a heated manner, versus responding, which responding suggests process, suggests cognitive. Yeah,
you're going to take a step back. Great. And I think that ties it all together, right? So for you to have process, for you to have those outcomes, you have to know what you're doing. What you want. And so if you don't know what the good successful play looks like, if you don't know what your touchdown looks like, if you don't know what the players on the field are supposed to be doing, you don't have anything to measure against. And your ability to be intentional, which is to think of a specific outcome, is almost non-existent. You're going to try something like, what do you want to happen? I don't know. Let's just run the play and see what happens, and I'll decide if I like it. That's not how we win in sports or in music. We know what a good outcome looks like on the stage. Applause, right? I know how to get applause. I know how to get the ball in the end zone. I know how to get that ball over the over the home run fence. So
you are speaking in substantial sports vernacular.
Yeah, man.
Get that thing over the stuff and put it in the
and it's a McTwist. And I got McTwist. So but the point is that we can really bring a high level art and science to something that's repeatable, because we've agreed it. And I think I think this whole thing is going to talk about process. In the end, it's about process, but it's also simplification. If there's too many variables, you cannot focus your attention on learning. And I heard it said recently, I think it's Gino, founder of Traction, or the author of the book Traction, founder of Entrepreneurial Operating System, said that any system properly executed is better than no system, or any structure properly executed is better than no structure at all. And that's absolutely true, because if you decide here's the process, if we decide here are the plays, then you at least have something to measure against, and you've eliminated so many options to get confused. Should I go left? Should I go right? No, we decided we're going left. Okay, how do we make that work for us? And now everything gets easier to run, and you get those repetitions. And once you consistently get the outcome based on something that is measurable, memorizable, then we can really increase our confidence and know what we can start to predict. We can feel good about ourselves. Success is not an accident. All comes back down to just simplifying it.
Totally agree. Yeah. I mean, having a process, having systems, having tools that you rely on for repeatable outcome, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't know how or what or why you're doing what you're doing, it's impossible to identify gaps. It's impossible to identify what's working that you need to do more of, or what's not working that you need to work on or replace. And so, certainly part of self-efficacy is putting in the effort to develop those processes or procedures or approaches or tools or techniques or tips or whatever, because we've got to be able to have something, to your point, to repeat, rehearse, to feel confident.
You need a system. I mean, I go back to Nick Saban. I was like, hey, you got a way. We all got a way as well. In my building, we got a way, and we're going to go with mine. Yours might be fine, but we're going to use mine. Everybody's 350 people in this building and know my system. We're using mine. Yeah. And so he's got a great one, but having one is the essence of that. Constantly changing systems or not having one and trying to decide if you like the outcome in retrospect, as opposed to defining what the outcome looks like based on consistency is not the way to create confidence.
Well, and in the final 3 minutes, the other thing to remember is that as a leader of an organization, it's not just your self-efficacy that matters, right? It's your team's self-efficacy. And so if you're a leader who likes to be whimsical, who likes to shoot from the hip, who likes to just roll the dice, the problem is that you're creating a lack of self-efficacy in your team, because they don't always believe that what they're doing is going to elicit results, because they don't know what the hell you're doing. And so, it's not just, as an organization, as a leader, your job as a leader is to get the most out of the people that are on your team, right? To bring everybody up. And so, it's not just about you when you have people that follow, right? Whether it's a leader of a family, leader of a business, leader of a sports team, or leader of a team in general. Your job is not to just have a strong self-efficacy of your own, but also to help promote and develop self-efficacy in your team, so that whenever they're performing tasks, whenever they're doing their job, they have the confidence and the process and the procedures and the belief to achieve and to expect positive outcome.
Well, there's so much in that by itself, but process throughout the entire organization, and it's obvious that especially if you got a product or a service, you deliver something, you should have a process to button it down and make it really easy enough to get that consistent quality and profit and fun and have everybody love it, right? But the process that so often hits that at 60 miles an hour is the sales process. There's somebody in the organization who says, we need to increase sales. Okay, well, what's your sales process? Well, it's kind of different based on this. It's, you can never predict. It's all customized. And that's typically like either that super awesome first and only sales guy who's always been enabled, a natural salesperson, or it's the founder who has done all the selling. And what we figure out pretty quickly is, well, no, we need to make this replicable. We need to be able to teach this to other people, which means we got to simplify it. And the reality is that every other salesperson before you said this is too complicated, it's different every time, has been proven wrong. There's always 5 to 7 steps in the sales process. There's rarely more than that, and rarely fewer than that. There's usually sometimes 3, but usually in the 5 range, and they're consistent. And if we stick to them and we follow our checklist, it increases our sales closure rate, and it allows us to stay focused on our best deals. Because what we find is when we leave too much of that adaptability and too much talent, too much of the sales process rests on the talent of that founder who can make stuff up on the spot. We sometimes I mean almost always, sell something we shouldn't have sold. we get ourselves into trouble. And so making ourselves be consistent, put ourselves on a path, that's the first place to do it in that sales process. And so I think the essence of that is saying that not only does it make it being able to make it possible by other people is not dumbing it down. Let's just get that. It's not dumbing it down. It is, and people say, I got to dumb the sales process. No, you don't. It's actually quite sophisticated, and it's quite hard to simplify a process so half a dozen people can follow the same way and get consistent results. And if you do that effort, you will take away the danger of your improvisation from your talented ability to commit the firm to doing things it's never done before, because you've got the power to do so.
Love it. 30 seconds. Wrap it up.
The essence of self-efficacy is repeatability. You have to, if you're going to get the reps, you got to have one to have. You got to know what one of those repetitions looks like to give you something to measure against. And you're not going to get there if you don't have a process, and you're not going to have a process if you can't figure out how to simplify what you do. So simplify what matters most, break it down to the steps that are repeatable, and get the reps so you can have the belief and you can teach others in your organization to believe that they can too, and you will be successful.
Well done. Love it, man.
Hey, Brad.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. We'll see you next time on Playing to Win with Mark and Brad. See you, brother.
See you, man. Be good.